Hello, welcome to my tutorial for the Gabriella crossbody bag by Shamballa Bags. This is the second bag in the alpha pack and it's an absolute delight to make. In the tutorial I do mention the fact that I've used cotton for the main body instead of vinyl, leather, cork. Now I did find the cotton to be too light for the body, so I compensated by adding headliner to the lining, which has worked perfectly. So if you want to use cotton, as you can see, it's possible, but add headliner, not foam. Headliner's thin, so it still allows the bag to puff out at the bottom. Add headliner to the main panels, not the lining, so it would work probably a bit better. But we live and learn. So you can do it with cotton, but you do need to give some body with headliner. I did try fusible fleece initially and it didn't really work. The cotton wrinkled. So headliner is really the way to go, or scrim as some people call it. Before we begin the tutorial, I wanted to show you a second bag that I've made, and I've made this with all vinyl, and I found it to be a much nicer result with the pleats are more defined at the bottom, as you can see, and it just holds up better. This is a very thin vinyl that I've used, so because of that I did still use some headliner for the body, but had it been a thicker vinyl I wouldn't have bothered. I would just use the foam in the gusset as instructed. So as you can see, I've used the vinyl for one and cotton and vinyl for the other, and I'm pleased with both results. So it just goes to show you can adapt the pattern to use what you like and you're going to have a nice result. Without further ado, here's the tutorial. First, I'd like to go over everything I'm going to be using. I can't count the amount of times that when I make a tutorial, people are continuously asking me, what was I using, where did I get it from, and so on. So to save you having to ask and wait for the answer, I'm going to go over everything I will be using. So if you don't want to watch this, forward wind to where the index says that I'm starting to make the bag. So to start with, the pattern pieces. I laminate my pattern pieces, as many of you will know by now. I use an A3 laminator, and I use laminating pouches that are 250 macrons, which means they're 125 each leaf, and together they're 250. This makes for a nice, strong, sturdy result. And so I cut the pattern pieces out, then I laminate them. If they're bigger than A3, if it's a longer piece, then I do them in two halves, and then I just join them together with some tape, which is transport tape. It's medical tape, and it's quite stiff and sort of plastic to feel, but it comes away nicely as well. So I use that. Doesn't leave any sticky residue when you peel it off. It's brilliant stuff. But I haven't had to with these pieces. They all fitted within the sheet. Once I've cut everything out, I then cut anything we need to cut. Like for the connector, you've got the slot there. I just cut that out with a craft knife. And for the thumb lock for the female part, I've cut out that. Just makes it easier. Also for the flap panel, we have a choice of doing vinyl or fabric, woven. So if we use woven, we cut out the dotted or dashed lines, and if we use vinyl, we cut the straight line, this continuous line. So I do both, and then I write woven and vinyl so I don't get them muddled. So that's all the pieces that I've done ready. And then I've got my pieces ready. Now I'm going to be doing a slip pocket in addition to the zip pocket inside. So I've cut a piece of fabric, and it's 13.5 inches long and 9.5 inches wide, because it's going to be quite a big slip pocket. And I've used my exterior fabric for that. I just like to do a nice little bit of pretty inside. Then I've got my zip pocket piece lining. Again, I've used my exterior fabric, so when you open up the zip pocket you see something nice. It's always a nice little surprise. And then I've got my exterior fabric, and I have fused all of these with a medium weight interfacing. The interfacing I use is called Cotton Woven, and it's sold by a lady, Shirley Evans, on Crackers Fabrics Facebook group. I don't know if she ships overseas. She's in the UK. You'd have to join and ask her that. But it's a really nice firm, it's like cotton itself, and it fuses beautifully. I love it. If I don't want such a heavyweight stabilizer, I use Shapeflex SF101, but because this is for the exterior, I wanted to use a nice firm interfacing. Then I've got my lining pieces, the gusset, the bottom piece, and the lining panels, again interfaced in the same way. And we've got our vinyl. I've done a little piece here that's 1 7/8 of an inch long and 7/8 of an inch deep. That's for my handmade label. I may not need it, but I always cut it out of the little odds that come off the ends when we're cutting the vinyl. So I've done that in case. I haven't decided if I'll be using it yet, because I haven't decided where I'm going to put my label. We've got the zipper facing. Now we've got the gusset pieces and the bottom piece as well. Then I've cut my piping strips. I'm not giving out the measurements. Obviously the measurements are on the pattern piece, but if I give out the measurements, I'm virtually giving the pattern away. So all the measurements are in the pattern. So they're the piping pieces. I've got my strap, which thankfully my vinyl was exactly the length that I needed, so that was brilliant. And then the flap pieces, and I haven't done the lining. I wanted vinyl on both sides, but you could do, if you're doing a vinyl flap, vinyl on the top, and you could do the lining on the bottom. It's entirely up to you. Now we've got our foam pieces. Now we have the pattern pieces to cut the foam out with, and as you can see, I've cut the foam a lot bigger. That's because I never fuse my foam, ever. This isn't fusible foam anyway, but I don't fuse foam because you can end up with all sorts of problems and puckers and wrinkles and so on. So it's just not worth the risk. So I cut them to the size of the original pattern pieces. I stitched them in the seams, and then I trim the foam out of the seam allowance to reduce the bulk. That's my preference. You do as you would like to do. I've used Pellon Flex Foam for this bag. It's very thick foam. It is my favourite. So that's the one I use. And then for the flap, I'm using some headliner. This is 2mm thick, so it's not too thick. And I like the result it gives. It stops the flap being too firm so that it doesn't close down properly and it sort of sticks up like that. But it allows it, if you look, it flops it down. It's nice. It gives it some stability while stopping it from being rigid. So that's what I like to use. That's the fabrics, etc. Now, we've also got our hardware. Now you can use whatever end connectors you like, or you might just do a fold of like a little mini strap to put on the end, whatever you want to do. I'm using these end connectors that will sit on the side of the bag like so, with the clasp attaching like that. So it'll be like that, but hanging. So that's them, and obviously I've got my clasps, and these are all 2 centimetres wide. My slider, I'm using strap ends, which again 2 centimetres. I've got my Handmade Label, and I've got my thumb lock. I like to use a fairly big thumb lock if possible. And then I've got my zip pull, which I've done a heart one to match the heart fabric. Of course, I've got my rivets, and I'll be using 2 sizes. There's 9mm cap with 8mm post, and 9mm cap with 9mm post, depending on the thickness of what I'm riveting. I am actually planning to use extra rivets for decoration. And then I've got my zip. I always do it a little bit longer than the pattern requires. And how I do it, I don't use all those fancy gadgets or forks, etc. I start by opening the zip up and cutting diagonally. And I'm right-handed, so I want the right side to be longer than the left. So I go down a bit further and cut lower down, and then I just use a lighter to go over that, and then all I do is I get the zip pull and you've got the flat edge at the top and the curved parts at the bottom. Slip the one side on to begin with, and then come down to meet the other side, and then just start by sliding the zip into that side, lay it down, and voila, that easy. So you don't need all these gadgets. That's all I do. So, and then what I do to finish is just tidy up the ends, and then to stop the ends fraying whilst we're working. And this is just a simple barbecue lighter. I don't smoke, so I don't have normal lighters, so that's what I use. And then we've got our piping. I'm using 3mm piping, and I've cut both lengths out. Again, the length is in the pattern. And I like to use fabric labels that I have made, and I fold the raw ends over and just glue them down, and then I'll be stitching them in later. So that's all that hardware. Now for all the gadgets and gizmos that I'll be using. My scissors, I have my Fiskars 28cm dressmaking scissors. I have my Fiskars little, says easy action snippers. Love these, absolutely love these. Super sharp, although they are getting a little blunt now because they're quite old. So I shall be replacing them soon. Got my little snippers for loose threads and everything else. This particular brand I get from Lord's Sewing in the UK. I've got my Rotary Cutter, which is XOR, X''SOR. and it's a 45mm one. It's my favourite rotary cutter, and it's made in Taiwan. I don't know, I think that's the brand Nexor. It's very, very hard to get, and I currently can't find one in the UK, so I'm hoping this doesn't give out on me, because I've tried many and it's definitely my favourite. It's got a nice rubber handle, feels nice in my hand, so there you go. So that's the cutting tools. And then starting at the beginning of my row, I've got my roller. It's a leather roller, fantastic for rolling the vinyl when like making the straps, like to get a nice sort of sharp edge as such. So I always use my roller. I got this from Amazon. I get most of my goods from Amazon. I use a staple gun. This is a bit different to a normal stapler, and it's great because you can get right close up to the edge of the fabric and sort of get a good result of where you want it to be. I love this, and it takes normal size staples, so I use that, and I use it to go around curves and so on. So you'll see me using this, and then I use a staple remover to remove the staples afterwards. Obviously I only use staples in the seams, in places where it's not going to be seen, because it does leave marks in the fabrics. I have my little hammer. I use this to hammer down, like when we fold the prongs down, I just use the hammer just to get a nice flat edge, make sure that they're flat and level. I've got my punches. I use a twist punch with various dies, and I use a poly board with the twist punch, because if you don't use a poly board and you do it on your cutting mat, you'll damage your cutting mat. So this is what I use the poly board for. I got these from Amazon, but they do come from the trimming shop originally, but they sell on Amazon as well. So I use them, and sometimes I also use the good old draper punch. It depends on what I'm doing as to what I use. But these are really good sturdy ones. I once made the mistake of buying a really cheap set and they were awful. So I learnt my lesson and I went and bought some good branded ones. Pens, I use my friction pen, or this is a pen from Amazon. It doesn't have a brand name. They're just heat removable ink pens. I buy them in massive packs and different colours, and I love them. I prefer them to the friction pen. I will try to remember to post a link in the group for these. In the video of my description. No, the description of my video. I'll do my best to put a link, but I can't promise, I may forget. Apologies if I do. Glue. I try not to use too much glue, especially with vinyl, because vinyl can sometimes burn with glue. But my go-to glue is the Gutterman HT2 glue. Love, 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 love this. So I always use that. I've tried many, many different glues, leather glues, etc., etc., and they just don't work as well, personally. This little gizmo is like a toothpaste key, tube key. So I'm not really sure what you call them. I got them from Amazon, and again, I'll try to put the link in the description of the video for what they are. But they're brilliant. You get 4 in a pack. I use them for my toothpaste, for my moisturising cream, and for my glue. And you just wind the key up as you go. So it stops the end of toothpaste tubes, etc. Double-sided tape. Oh my goodness. I love the person that came up with double-sided tape. They are a genius. It certainly changed my sewing. The years of using pins, stabbing myself, etc., etc. are over. I very rarely use pins. I do use them, but not as often as I used to. Love double-sided tape, and I buy them in different widths. These are all sewable. depends on what double-sided tape you get as to whether it's sewable. I bought a craft tape from Amazon, and a pack of 10 double-sided tapes. They are not sewable, they gum up the needles, they stick, they're horrendous. So I never use them where I'm going to sew. However, they are very, very tacky, they stick well. So they do have their use. But these tapes I buy from a lady called Anne Foy of Bag Kits and Glitzy Bits Facebook group. She's brilliant, is Anne. She brings us all sorts of goodies. I buy most of my hardware from Anne. I buy a lot from Anne. She charges as little as possible. She's really competitive with her prices. And I can't recommend her enough. Now, for years, I've bought this glue, this tape from Anne. And it's brilliant. It's Style Fix tape from Farben Mixed, German company, 50 metres, and it's 4mm wide, £8.50, thereabouts. It may go up, may go down, it depends on what Anna has to pay for it. So yes, quite expensive, but very, very good. I love this tape. However, Anne has started selling a double-sided tape. I can't remember what length it is, 30 or 50, I'm not sure. She sells it in many different thicknesses. This is 4mm and 6mm. I think she may go up to 12mm. I'm not sure, don't quote me. But it's in the group, and depending on the roll size is the price. So, but the prices are silly. I think this was 60p. This is 80p. I'm not sure, but she'll let you know what the prices are. But very good prices. Considering the price of the branded one. So do get the tape from her, and she does ship overseas, which is fantastic. Now the other things I like to use are my clips. Used to be clover clips, you know, something like 10 for like £5 or something. Now you can just buy unbranded clips, which are great. They do just the same job and they last just the same amount of time. So I get lots of them. These I've only just started using recently. I found these. These are quilting sewing clips. Brilliant. These are Ottomax, 15 pieces. I got them from Amazon, and they don't mark your vinyl. They're lovely. So it's worth getting them. What else we've got? For the edge of the flaps, they're going to be white, and I don't like them to be white. So I get a matching colour pen. I used to use Sharpies, but then I found these pens, Crafts for All, again on Amazon. They're permanent, they're fabric markers, and they're not as thick as Sharpies, so they go on much easier, and there's quite a good colour choice. I use these, and if I use these on fabric, for instance, I would heat seal them with the iron, but I don't do that with the vinyl because I use an acrylic paint. For when I'm covering over different colours, I use this one, which is colourless. It's Jacquard Textile Colour, 100 colourless extender. It goes on white, but it dries clear. It doesn't stain. If you get it on the side of the vinyl, it doesn't leave any shininess. Just wipe it off. It's brilliant. So I put that on first, then I put that on with the brush. Leave it to dry, and you've got a nice coloured edge. I do use black and blue for because I use a lot of navy blue and black vinyl. So I did buy specific colours for that, but generally I use the colourless one for all sorts of colours. And then I think it's last but not least, my threads. Matching coloured thread and thimble, not a thimble, bobbin. It's up to you whether you use a matching thread or not. I grew up when my mum taught me to dressmake that we always used a matching thread. so that the thread was almost invisible. You didn't want the thread to be seen. However, I do notice a lot of people nowadays, they like their thread to stand out, and you know what, kudos to them, because one slight mistake, it shows up, sticks like a sore thumb if the stitching goes off a little bit. And even with 47 years experience of sewing, I'm not brave enough to do that. So I like to try and hide my stitches. I mean, I'm happy with my stitching, but sometimes you might just go off slightly, and I am very, very, very particular. If it's not perfect, off it comes and I redo it. So kudos to you if you like to use threads that stand out, but I don't. So that's it. I think we've covered absolutely everything apart from the machine and the iron. You know what your machine looks like. Oh, and I have my green machine that I use. This was from the trimming shop. Well, it's actually via Amazon. But it's brilliant. I couldn't add, I can't put that back at the minute. I couldn't add rivets manually. I'm rubbish. That's really changed up the situation for me, so I love it. And you can buy various dyes. I've got lots of different dyes that it can do things with. So that's it. That's everything covered, I'm pretty sure. So hopefully you won't need to ask me questions and wait for answers. The heart fabric I'm using is by Rose and Hubble. Doesn't have a name or a number. There's no other information. It was just called Hearts fabric that I bought from a shop which is now sold out anyway. But it's made by Rose and Hubble. I'm sorry I can't give you more information than that. This is bubblegum pink vinyl that I bought from Amazon. That's it. I think we've covered everything. And the lovely, pretty, glittery pink lining fabric that I bought. Well, actually, my friend bought it from me from Joann's in America, and she shipped it over to me. Love it. Absolutely love it. So you can, if you're in America, Joann's do lots of different glitter fabrics and colours. So there you go. So we're going to crack on ahead with the tutorial next. Okay, to begin with, we need to prepare the exterior, and we need one main panel piece and the contrast band. Now when I cut this, I did fussy cut, and by fussy cut we mean we are very fussy how we cut, and I did everything so it was symmetrical, so it was even, because when I lay this down, for instance, I didn't want it to be say like that, so that you've got 3/4 of a heart and a whole heart showing. Just, it looks untidy. So I did it so that I had equal on each side, and it, as you can see, it looks a lot better. So I only lost a tiny amount of fabric as I moved it over to cut, so that's fine. And what I've done is I've marked the centre, top and bottom, and you can either do that by folding in half, creasing and then doing a line, or laying this so that it's level with your ruler and equal on each side, and then mark your line, whichever you prefer to do. Now we get the contrast band. I've also marked the centre points for that, and on the pattern piece itself, it's got a marking which I can't find at the moment. Oh, there. It's got a marking there. It's 1/4 inch seam on each side. So you can either mark your 1/4 inch seam. However, you're going to be folding that over, and if it's hard to see the line. So I marked 1/2 inch along each edge, and that way I can fold the edges in to the line, which is a bit easier to do than trying to fold on the line when you can't actually see the line. And I get my double-sided tape and lay that along the line. And I'll get my little scissors that I use for snipping tape. And do the same on the other side. And then I'll remove the backing. And then fold. I'm going to turn it around so I can see the line. I'm folding up to the line. And I get my little roller, and this helps press the vinyl down onto the tape as well. I'm just adjusting the lights because it's very much in the shadow. And like so. And then I'm going to get some more tape and lay that down. And I don't want to lay it right along the edge because you could end up with a little bit of it peeking out from underneath, and that's not very nice to see. So I just do it set in a little bit. And then now we want to line it up with the markings that we've made. I need to turn that round so I can see this side to make sure I lay it down equally. And just checking that I've got everything lined up. I'm happy with that. And now we stitch up on each side to anchor it down. Right, so I've stitched along each side, and now what we want to do is get our pattern piece, and we've got marks at the bottom for the pleats, and we need to transfer these to our fabric. So put the pattern piece over the fabric and then just slide up carefully. You want to make sure you don't go off in any other direction. You want to stay in the centre and just slide up a little bit, and then mark the lines for your pleats. There's 6 lines altogether on each side. I need to miss this line off, and you can't see the lines probably, but I can see them through the paper because they're on the other side. Because rather than folding fabric, I double print and then lay it face down so that they're exactly the same. Okay, so we've marked our lines, and now what we need to do is pinch at the centre line and fold back, and you want to make sure that these lines are matching up like so, and then you want to fold it to the outer edge. So when you're on the right side, you're folding out to the right edge, and make sure that all the fabric is laying flat against the edge. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Now I'm using the lesser spotted pin to keep that in place. But when you fold, like so, you want to make sure that you don't go, this is exaggerated to make the point, but so it's like that. You want to make sure that it's nice and flat to the edge. And we do the same on this side. I'm having a fight with the fabric to make it stay flat. It's definitely worth taking your time and making sure that it's all even and nicely placed. Like so. And we just take to the machine and we just want to stitch along just to put them in place. Okay, so they're stitched in place and we can remove the pins. And there you have your pleats. And you can see the shape of the bag forming, can't you? And I'm just going to do exactly the same with this piece, and then I shall return for the next steps. Now we need to prepare the piping. And what I've done is I've drawn a line along the centre, and then we need to lay some double-sided tape along that line. You don't need to do this, but I find that if I don't get control of the piping cord, then it wants to slip and slide all over the place, and it gets stuck to the tape that we put along here, and it just becomes a hot mess. So by doing this, I get control. So I start by placing the piping an inch in from the end, and the reason for that is we will be putting the end of the piping through the seam of the bag, so we need to stop the bulk of the piping, and we just snip that end off. So that's the piping, nice and still. It's not going to move anywhere. And then we just lay some double-sided tape along the middle of one side, or slightly nearer to the piping. And then remove the backing, and then we basically fold the edges to meet each other. And press as we're going. And then I just get my roller and I roll it so it's right next to the piping cord. Like so. And then we're just going to stitch along to stop the piping from opening up. Okay, so here's the piping stitched. I haven't gone too close to the piping because I don't want to risk the stitching being seen once the piping's on the bag. And what I've done is I've marked the halfway point along the piping, and I get my panel, and I've already still got the halfway point marked. If I hadn't, I'd mark the halfway point. And we get our pattern piece, and on the pattern there's a line for the piping to start and stop. So we just mark that on the panel. Like so. And then we just start with placing the piping, and then we will be snipping the piping on the curve, but we just need to make sure that the piping is evenly placed before we do any cutting. So, happy with where the piping is, I'm just going to take off the clips for the curved part. We don't want to cut the woven fabric, the panel. We're just going to snip the piping, and I'm just going up to where I stitched. I'm using that as a guide, but it doesn't matter if I do cut the stitching. But we don't want the snips to go too far up towards the piping cord, because again we don't want that to be seen once it's on the bag. So now if you look, when we place the piping down, because we've snipped, we're able to open up the piping to sit nicely. So, if you can see what I mean, the difference. So there's with it's being snipped and that hasn't been snipped. So it makes a huge difference to the overall finish. So there we have that panel done, and I'm going to prepare the other panel before we continue further. We get our front piece that has the band, contrast band, and we're going to add the female part of the thumb lock. We get our pattern piece, and I use the top of the pattern piece to line it up because we've added what do we call it? Piping. So I'm just going to mark the centre there, and then I'm going to make sure that it is the centre. Slightly off, so I've just redone it. And we get the washers, which will be going that way. So I normally mark the washers where the prongs will go, but these are going in a different place. They're not quite. So I'm going to have to do measurements. That's the best thing to do with this, because of where my prongs will go. Normally, if the washers are going this way, I use the centre line to line them up, but they're going this way, so I need to get the measurements for the width. So I'm going to measure from the top to the bottom prong, which is 3/4 of an inch. And it's 3/8 of an inch from the centre. So I'm measuring I'm using a heat dissolvable pen. It also can be washed away with water, so it's nice and clear. I said 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so I've measured for the prongs, and I'm just going to measure across. Right, so 1 3/4 of an inch, and so three-quarter. Right, that's the centre. Okay, I'm happy with that. Okay, so I'm marking and measuring and marking and measuring. So I'm going to dip my tissue in some water. Right, I've not been very good at all at explaining that, and I do apologise, but it's the first time I've had a thumb lock that I've had to insert that way. So, I mean, it's all a case of measuring up to make sure you're happy with where your lock's going to go. So once you've marked, make sure that the marks you're doing are the same height. So 4 3/4 of an inch, 4 3/4 of an inch, and 5 1/2, 5 1/2. So they're both the same height, which I'm happy with. And they both start 1/2 inch in and 5/8 of an inch in. Okay, so no time like the present. And now's the time to cut. Okay, let's see. There's a little bit of room if I need to adjust, but I'm hoping, and it honestly just take all the time in the world, like you've just watched me do, take forever to measure, and I'm happy with that. And I'm just going to check the height. So just 4 5/8, 4 5/8. So I'm happy with that. Right, and this is where my little hammer comes in, because you can probably see, but they're not quite sitting flush. And now they are. So, you watched me spend forever measuring and measuring, and that's what I do. I make sure it's very accurate. So I don't know, it depends on your thumb lock as to the way they go in. I'm just looking for my other one. I've got another one here. Yeah, with the prongs like that. Very different. So it does depend on your press lock as to how it goes in. So at least we got that out of the way. Now it's time to do the flap, but I want to do something extra for the flap, and I'm going to show you what I'm doing so that should you wish to do so, you can. If you don't want to do it, then skip this next bit. But I want to add a contrast band onto the flap, but I'm fussy cutting, as in I'm being very selective about where I cut my fabric. Now, what I've done was, I've got my vinyl pattern piece and I've marked an inch down. I've lined it up at the top and I've marked an inch down from that bottom piece, and that's the length that I want my piece to be, so that I've got 1/2 inch overhang, which I've marked with the dashed lines. That's where I want my pattern piece to lay. That line I've done there is the centre point for reference. I hope you're keeping up with me. So I've done the dashed lines on my pattern piece for where the folds on the fabric will be. I'll be folding them under into the layers of vinyl. And then when I did my pattern piece here, I measured it up, checked it. When I took it away, the layout was completely off, so I wasn't happy with there. So I want the pink, pretty pink ones to go with the vinyl I've used. So I've moved across and I've measured the distance from the top there to the cut-off line, and then measured equally to top and bottom. I hope I'm making myself clear. So basically we've got the same distance from the point of that heart to the bottom line, to the heart here and the top line. So when they're folded over, I'll be folding just at the crucial points where the hearts begin and end. So I've got 3 pink hearts in. Then I drew the centre points and lined it up, looked at my pattern pieces here, and I thought, okay, they look good. So I drew down. When I finished, I marked dashes here for the end line, and when I finished, I measured to the edges of each heart to see if they matched up, and they did. So it's completely symmetrical, completely even. I'm very happy with that. So the next thing is to cut that out. So this ruler, I didn't mention my rulers by the way, but this ruler is Shiny by Shiny Mary. I don't think it's available in America. There's only a couple of places in the UK that are selling it. I have done a tutorial on these, a Tuesday tip, sorry, not a tutorial, a Tuesday tip. So look for my channel and I'll explain in greater detail about these rulers because they're brilliant. But check it out, and I think I do say it where I actually got it from in the UK. And for you ladies abroad, postage would be a bit costly. Not too much though, because it's not very heavy. And if you wanted me to get one for you, I'd be happy to do so. But we could work that out. So message me and we could go there. And I've been talking to you. I've made a huge error, and I haven't given myself a seam allowance for folding it over. Oops. So I have to go to the next row of hearts after all that hard work. Oh. Well, it's my own fault for chatting. So I'll show you what I did now. Forward wind if you're not interested. At least I've got these points for measuring, which is good. So I'm lining up to get the centre points. Like so. And I'm going to measure. Now I've done this, it'll be a lot quicker for me. Where's my ruler? It's more accurate, it's got more little lines. And here it's 3/8 of an inch from the top of the heart, and that's the top line that I want. And the bottom heart, 1/2 an inch, so a little bit more. Okay, so the actual measurement across is 2 3/4. So okay, I know I'm not explaining as I'm doing it, but I'm hoping you're managing to keep up. Right, this looks like this will be correct, so let's draw the lines, and that's the beauty of the heat removing ink, so that all these marks will be removed. Okay, so I'm just looking at all the marks. It looks like I'm slightly off. If you look here, I'm slightly off, so I'm going to change colour. I hope you're managing to keep up with me. Let's see. Oh, out of red ink. Okay, let's go for this red one. I have so many pens. Right, this centre point up here is important. That is centre. That's why I actually drew it off centre, that's why. So this should be hopefully good. Okay, you probably can't see but I can. So now I'm going to mark my seam allowance. And I'm going to give a generous 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm probably not explaining this very well at all, and for which I apologise. But I'm really doing this off the cuff. I'm not following any guidelines. I'm just making it up as I go along. So you're getting the rough draft version. Okay, so marking from the centre is 1 3/4 and 3.5. So that looks right. So I'm going to now cut again, and I know I've wasted a bit of fabric, which is really awful because I can't get this fabric anymore. So it's not ideal, but these things do happen. So now I'm cutting my fabric with the seam allowance. We don't need the seam allowance top and bottom because I've included that in on the drawing. I think that's where I went wrong. I didn't really think about the seam allowance because I'd included it in on the top and the bottom. Okay, let's get that fabric out of the way. And I hope, turning my iron on, I hope I've got it right. Ooh. Okay, let's iron that. And that looks good to me. So very, very slightly off, but we can correct that with the seam, with the folding over the edges. So that's not a disaster. Literally 1/8 of an inch slightly off. Well, in fact, it would be 0.5/8 of an inch off. So it's fine. I'm going to interface this now, and I'm also going to add some fusible fleece just to give it a bit of padding and a bit of stability before we add it to the flap. Right, I have fused excuse me, some interfacing and then fusible fleece, making sure that it was evenly placed, and I've left the seam allowance free so I don't have the bulk. And when I ironed it on, I made sure that it was central, so ignoring the lines that I'd drawn, which I'd erased anyway, that I'm happy with the placement. And we need to get the flap that I'm going to be using. Now, the thing about using this, if by doing this, I can't trim the bottom or the top edges once we've sewn around. So I can, if I need to, trim the sides and around the curve to a point, but because I will have this going over, I can't trim it. Bear that in mind. If you choose to do this, you will have to make sure your sewing's very accurate and so's your cutting, etc. So once I've done all of this and placed it on and placed this on the back, before I sew, I shall make sure I'm happy with the placement, and if I'm not, I can trim before I sew it. Having said that, let's start with the placement. So I want to find the center of the flap, and I line this up so right. And it's 10 1/4, so it's 5 1/8, and then
This one's a bit easier to measure. 8 3/4, so 4 3/8. So I just want to mark okay, let's just hold that there. Hold that there. And then I just want to measure 3 7/8 of an inch. Oh, that's not a very clever thing to do. Let's do that. So 3 7/8, and I can do that by lining up with the line. 3 7/8. So I'm happy with that. And I'm just going to and again I'm double checking. So you check and double check, and I'm moving that over one. So it's 7/8 of an inch each side. And 1 3/8 of an inch, 1 3/8 of an inch. So I'm happy with that. And now I'm getting my double-sided tape. I'm just trying to get the backing off, but it's not wanting to separate. Goodness me, right. Let's try this. That's a bit better. Right, so I've put the double-sided tape on. Lining it up with again, measure, always measure so many times. 3.5 across that way, 3.5, and then making sure that's straight there, 4 inches there, 4 inches there. Brilliant. Now I just need to sew to attach either side, which I need to do before I add the other side of the flap. However, I want to add my headliner to this side as well, and by stitching I'm going to be anchoring this down, which is great. It's exactly what I want to do. So I need to add some double-sided tape. I hope you're keeping up with me. Any of this you want to leave off, you can. I mean, you don't have to do exactly what I'm doing. You can pick and choose what you do. I just wanted to show you, you know, something different that I'm doing. So I'm just putting some tape along the top edge. The backing tape is being a pain. Oh, got it, I think. Yes. And then I just want to put some along the bottom edge, just to keep it in place and stop it moving about while we stitch it. Okay, so I'm doing this by eye. It looks good to me. And now I'm going to stitch from the top to the bottom. I've stitched either side, so that's firmly stitched down now, and the headline is stitched on. And I want to add my handmade label to my flap, so I need to do it now before we add the other side. So I've just placed my thumb lock, the male part there, so I can see where it is in relation to everything. And I don't want to place my label over a pink heart, for example. I want to sort of place it carefully. So I thought I'd place it around there. So I'm going to use the tops of the hearts and the centre as a guide for marking. But I want to check that before I do anything else. Oops, upside down. So that's at 3/4, and this is also at 3/4, and okay, so now I want to get my craft knife and pierce through. with my lid. I never leave my craft knife out loose, because I did that once, went like that, sliced my hand. Awful, absolutely awful. So I always put the lid on. Okay, so let's push them through. Oh, I beg your pardon. I always add some June Taylor fray block. And this is something I didn't show you at the start, which I forgot. So I always add some just to stop it fraying. I don't know if it would or not, but I just like to do it as a precaution. Right. Once I've added it, I just want to make sure, right, slightly down on one side, which is okay, because I just very slightly adjust it. I mean, it literally just needs a tiny amount, and you just do a tiny amount at a time. That's better. Oh, now my phone's going off. Sorry about that. Okay. Let's fold that down, and again, I definitely want to hammer this. Otherwise we'll feel it. And I just like to add a little bit more fusible fleece. I don't want to add anything too thick. And yes, I could have added the label before I've stitched down the foam, so it would have been covered by the foam, but I really wanted to do it this way and have it going through the foam. And all I need to do is cover that over, and that won't be felt. Now, I don't iron it because, well, it just goes very, very flat and thin and doesn't really work so great. So I just use my Gutterman HT2 glue. Like so. And then leave that to dry. The other thing I want to do is to put some double-sided tape on each side where the seam is going to be folded over from the strap, like so. So oh my goodness me. That's that. Okay, and now I fold the edges over like so. And there we have the top of the flap ready. I think that looks really nice. And then all we need to do is to snip the threads so they don't poke out and join the flaps together. So I'm going to use double-sided tape and then stitch all the way round. I'm going to leave this to dry for a bit longer. I don't want it shifting on me, and then we'll come back and do that. Right, so this is dried. I've added some double-sided tape to this side of the flap. I've not added it to the top yet, and that's because I may have to pull this back and just trim the seam to match. I'm going to focus on getting this part evenly placed. Okay. Okay, now this side is wanting to misalign a little bit, so I'm having to I'm happy with how that looks. Right, I am going to stitch around. I am not stitching this part yet. So I'm just going to stitch around this part. Okay, so I've stitched around. I'm very happy with the placement actually, and with the stitching. So there's not a lot I have to trim. There's a tiny amount just there. I don't know if you can see it. Teeny amount. So the thing I wanted to do was to avoid having to trim along here, which I don't have to do. And it really is just a case of trimming a tiny bit off at a time. Don't go removing great big chunks. You see these little slivers that I've got. And then I come to the front to finish tidying up. And I want to just tidy this edge up a bit. like so. So I'm very happy with that. A bit more here. And all I've got left to do now is to colour the edge in. But I really want to make sure that it's going to look right in that colour. I'd rather have a white edge than an edge that looks wrong in the colour. So I just want to put some double-sided tape on a scrap of vinyl that I've got. Like so. And then fold it over so that I've got what I've got on the edge of this, and then I'm doing this so that I can then compare with the flap I've got, rather than just doing this on the flap and then it looking not good and I'm stuck with it, or I have to redo all the flap again. So it's worth doing this just to be sure. So that's an idea. Okay. Right. Personally, if you can see the difference there. Personally, I don't think this is a good match for pink. And I'd rather have the white showing than have this pink. So all I'm going to do is use the clear acrylic paint to sort of stop this going fluffy, if you know what I mean. So I'm just going to, I like to put some in the lid, and it's easier to control the amounts that I'm using. And then I just get some tissue to wipe the excess off. And that's that. Right, so I went ahead and just put some double-sided tape along the top here inside. This is the edge now, nice and smooth with the acrylic paint. I've put some double-sided tape along the top edge of the flap, and I get the back panel and we mark 2 inches down from the top. I know I've got this upside down, I'll turn it the right way up. 2 inches down from the top, and I've also marked the centre point. And I'm getting the flap, which I've also marked the centre point of, and I'm laying it along the line like so. And now I'm going to stitch 2 rows of stitching along here. So I've done 2 rows of stitching, and I'm also going to add grommets. It's not just functional, I just think they look nice as well. So I need to mark where I want to add the grommets, and the first one to do is here, and I want to make sure that I don't go through the stitching. So I'm just double checking. Okay, and I use my twist punch for this. And as you can see, hopefully, I haven't gone through the stitching. And I'm using my 9x8 rivets, meaning 9mm cap, 8mm posts, because it's not all that thick. I could even get away with a 6mm post, but they're 8mm caps, and I wanted to use the 9mm. So I get my green machine, that's the rivets added there, and if I wanted to I can go along, which I think I might do. If I add a rivet there, slightly away from that actually, 1/4 of an inch. Of an inch, and then okay, so I've measured that out and I've done 1.5 inch intervals. Had I not done this, I was thinking of doing rivets all the way round. I just feel that it would be a bit overkill if I do the rivets as well. That is an option. That is something you could do if you chose to do that. There's all sorts you could do for decoration. If you do embroidery, you could embroider your flap. So yeah, you can think outside the box. If you have a look in the Shamballa Bags group, you'll see plenty of ideas from ladies who are very imaginative and have done all sorts of wonderful things with their bags. So if you can, do take a look if you're on Facebook, because I know you might be just watching this on YouTube, but if you can join Shamballa Bag Group and just go through all the photos and have a look. Okay, so I'm just feeling that they are definitely pressed. So we've added the flap. And that's how it will be on the bag. So I'm very pleased with that. And next we're going to return to do the gusset. Now I'm going to do the gusset. Now if you make the smaller pieces that you're going to fuse, by all means do that. Mine are the same size as the pattern pieces, and I am just going to base stitch them down the sides to keep the foam in place, and I'm going to do that with all 3 pattern pieces. I've base stitched the foam to the 3 pieces, and we just need to transfer the markings for the side connectors. Earlier on I have actually cut the line out so that I can mark the pattern piece. Like so. Now my connectors aren't going to sort of connect with this line as such. I'm using these, which are going to sit like that. So I could have wanted to put them like that, but I just thought they'd be nice like that. So I shall be placing them halfway, so to speak, like using that line to place these halfway down. So what I'm doing now is I want to mark a line for halfway. So that's the halfway. I can just wipe this off because it's still wet, so just wipe that off with my finger. So I've marked my lines like that, and do the same on this side. So mark the halfway line. Sometimes just the heat friction from your finger can actually get rid of the line. So I've marked for my connectors. Just checking I'm going to be happy with that. Yes, I am. So I don't want those marks to wear away or rub away. So I'm going to cut them as well now. Like so, and I've dropped my lid, so I have to be careful with that craft knife. Put it over there. So I'm not adding them yet, but I just want to see how they'll look, because if I don't like the look, I'll simply cut new gussets and do a different connector. Yeah, I'm going to like that, so that's good. So now we want to join these pieces together, and we'll be stitching them together with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance straight across, and I'm going to connect both pieces. Okay, so they're both sewn together, and what I want to do now is to cut the foam out of the seam allowance. And then what we need to do is fold the seam so that it's facing into the base, and we're going to top stitch on both ends. So that's our gusset prepared. At this point you can add your connectors. I'm choosing not to. I won't be adding mine just yet because I just think they're getting in the way. So I should add them in a little bit. So we need to get our panels that we've prepared and mark the halfway point. And I'm just going to mark both sides. And we've already got the mark made on the main panels still showing. I'll just go over that just to make sure. And this is where my wonderful stapler comes into play. You don't have to do that. You can use whatever you like. Clips, or I'm not really sure what else, but but I do this because it's really handy for me. I find it really helpful with going around the curves. And I always make sure that the staple isn't going in on this side where the foam is. I want it to go on the smooth side so it's easier to remove afterwards. I never leave the staples in. And you have to make sure that the staple isn't anywhere near the seam allowance where you're going to be stitching, because you don't want to have needles breaking or machines even getting damaged. So you do have to be careful. Okay, so going round the curve. And allowing for the piping to come through this seam, so it looked like that. And do the same around this side. so that's that. So I'm going to take it to the machine. We're going to stitch at 6mm seam allowance, 1/4 inch. So I've stitched around, and I started at 1/4 inch seam allowance at the top here, but I like to stitch really snug next to the piping. So I've actually stitched more or less at 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way round. As long as you start at 1/4 inch, that's the most important thing for it to match up with the lining. But you stitch the seam that you want. So like I say, I like to stitch right snug next to the lining, piping. Just to show you, to remove the staples, how easy it is. Get yourself a staple remover, very cheap. Got mine from Amazon. And you just pop it in like so. Very easy to get out. And that's why I said about not putting it into the foam, because it sinks into the foam, makes it harder to get out. So that's that. And then what I like to do is just pop the bag out and check that I'm happy with the piping. Right, I want to just stitch that a bit closer. It's a bit wide there, you can see. So it's just a little bit wide there, so I'm just going a bit closer there. Otherwise I'm happy with that. And I will then go and do exactly the same with the other side and come back when that's done. Okay, here she is. I'm loving the look so far. Now at the start of the tutorial, before the tutorial, I explained about the cotton and what to do, what's happened. So I shan't go into details again, but as you can see, it's not very strong on its own. So if you've done the same as me and used cotton, and you need to strengthen the stability of the bag, we'll be using headliner. We can't add it yet because I've cut the piece out, but because we do the pleating, the bag will shrink as such, so I will need to trim the headliner down. So to begin with, we've got the zipper facing piece, and the measurements are in the pattern. I'm just wondering if that's quite the right measurement. Yeah, I thought so. It just needs trimming a little bit more. That's better. It's only a tiny amount, just a thin sliver, but I could see it wasn't quite right. Okay, so we're going to draw a box, and we're going to do 1/2 inch in and 1/2 inch up from the bottom edge. So basically the lines are 1/2 inch in from all the edges. And this will leave us with a rectangular box that's 7 inches long, 1/2 inch deep. And I'm going to now cut the box out. I normally do this freehand, but it's a god unearthly hour of around 2 or 3 a.m. and my eyes aren't as sharp and my hands aren't as steady at this time in the morning, so I'm following the ruler. to get an accurate line. Okay, and then use my snippers to draw to the very end, to cut to the very end, sorry. And there we have the zipper facing ready, and we just put some double-sided tape along the outer edges on the back, of course. And pull the backing off. And we need to get the centre of the panel, and you can do that by either folding and creasing or measuring. So I've already marked the dot, and we want to place it 2 inches down from the top. And I'm going to use my ruler as a guide, and I haven't measured the zipper facing, silly me. That's better. Okay. So let's go again. There we go. And we just need to go and stitch around the outside edges of the box. So now we need to do is cut the fabric out of the box and cut down to about 1/4 inch seam allowance away from the stitching. There we go. That's the box cut out. I can see we've still got a little bit of, that's it, a little bit of ink left. So we get double-sided tape again, and this time we lay it on the inner edges of the box, and I just take one backing off for the moment. Zipper pull if you're right-handed to the left with the zip closed. If you want to do it the other way, you can. And then pull the zipper through, and this is a lovely little zipper pull, a little heart, and it's from Handmade Bags, in case you wonder. Okay, then we turn this back over and we put some double-sided tape along the line of stitching that we did, just above it. And I'm going to do another row along the top to save a bit of time, because I'll be doing that shortly. Okay, peel the bottom backing off. You can get your zipper pocket piece now. You need to bear in mind that you need to have a directional print that's going to be the right way up. So you want it to be the right way up, because we're going to lay it here like so. Then it's going to be folded back and folded up. So when you open the pocket, you want the direction of the print to be correct. So I'm going to stitch along the bottom here, just along the bottom. Right, so I've just stitched along the bottom with the threads loose. So let's pull those threads up and through. Just want to check that I'm happy with where the threads have started and ended. Yes, good-o. And then we just want to tie these threads off. There we go. And then we fold this back and just finger press it, that's fine. Then we peel the backing off the top tape and fold this up. Press it down and then take it to the machine and stitch up the side, along the top and down the side. Okay, so turn over again. And pull the top thread through. And then all we need to do now is stitch down the sides. So there we have it. The zip pocket's made, and when you open it up, nice to see a pretty print inside. With a zipper pull to match. The last thing I need to do on this piece is to add the handmade label that I'd prepared earlier. And in case you do the same, or you've just bought them for the first time and I'm wondering how you're going to add them, I've glued the ends in, or you can use double-sided tape just to fold the ends over so they're not raw. Then I'm just going to add a little bit more double-sided tape. And peel the backing off. And then I fold them in half to find the centre. And because I erased the centre mark, which I didn't think about, I just use the ruler and I place it above the zipper pocket so that when you open the bag, you see the label. So I just go and stitch that now at the machine on each side. And the next thing we'll be doing is the slip pocket, which isn't part of the pattern, but I'll be covering that anyway. Okay, so for the slip pocket we need a panel piece and the slip pocket piece, and I've cut a piece that's 13.5 inches long and 9.5 inches across. Quite big, but I want a big pocket. So first thing we need to do is to create the pocket, folding in half, right sides together, and then I'm going to stitch down and so far in, leave a gap of 2 to 3 inches, and then continue round. I always double stitch at the corners to reinforce them, so that when we're pushing the corners out, there's less likelihood of going through and damaging the corners. Okay, so once we've done that, we trim the corners to reduce the bulk. I'm going to turn my iron on. And I've stitched the sides at 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I've stitched the bottom at 1/2 inch, just to give us a bit more leeway with doing the seam, for closing the seam afterwards. Just makes it a bit easier when we've got slightly more fabric to turn in. And I always iron the seam before I turn, just makes it so much easier. Okay, so now I turn. And push the corners out with my fingers as much as possible. And then I grab my tool that I use. This is a clover tracer pen that you use for when you're tracing patterns on carbon paper, but it's perfect for the job. And because I've done a 1/2 inch bottom, the seams are a little bit bulkier at this bottom corner, so I'm having to coax them out a little bit more than the top. And before I do anything else, I just, if you just press like that, you've got every chance that the seam's gone in on each other like that. So I like to just press the seam open, and yes, I'm going to create creases on the fabric by doing this, but they come out perfectly, it's not a problem. But this needs to be done. Okay. Got little loose threads sticking out there. Okay. Steam on. And because we've already folded the seam in, we've got a nice folded seam there for the bottom. And we just need to top stitch along the folded edge. Right, so that's our pocket piece formed. And we get our main panel piece. I'm turning it upside down just for ease of seeing what I'm doing. And I'm just measuring across the size of the pocket, which is 8.5 inches. So we measure the top, which is 9 3/4. So to avoid trying to work all this out in my head, first thing in the morning, I'll fold a crease in the fabric and mark the halfway there. Just had to make sure, checking, double checking and triple checking. Okay, so I'm going to place this 2 inches below the top edge, like we did with the zip pocket, and placing that halfway. And then I get my pins. Once I've pinned, I just check that there's been no movement and we're still good to go. And I'm just checking across here, 1 3/8 inch, 1 3/8, so we're nicely spaced out. And now we're going to stitch down, across and up. Now I'm going to place some rivets at the top here. So I'm not going to stitch all the way to the top, because once I punch the hole through the rivets, there's every chance I'll cut the threads. So I'll just stitch so far up and double stitch there. And I've done a double row of stitching along the bottom. I just like to reinforce the bottom to make sure that we're not going to go pushing our fingers through. Now it's up to you whether you want to keep a nice large pocket or form 2 pockets, but they would be quite narrow and you wouldn't get very deep, so I'm leaving it as it is. I'm just going to get rid of the marks I made, and now I just want to punch the holes for the rivets. I'm not measuring, I'm doing it by eye, but if you want to measure to make sure that you are accurate, by all means do. Okay. You don't have to add rivets if you don't want to. I just think they look nice. And they are functional in the fact that they reinforce the top so that you don't get wear and tear on the stitching and it come away. just noticed there's a thread there that I missed. Okay. Okay. Gosh, that's heavy. So that's the slip pocket done. And now what we need to do is to mark the bottom of each panel for the pleating. So as before, we lay the pattern piece on and slide it up. Make sure I didn't want to move then. That's that one. Okay, and then as before, we pinch the middle line, and then on the right side ones we go to the right, and on the left side ones we go to the left. Make sure that we're flat on the edge there. Oh, I didn't mark the bows. Oh, goodness me. I'm thinking, where's the other ones gone? There we go. And then again, pinch, fold out. Makes it a bit difficult with the slip pocket, but it's doable. And then we just stitch across each one just to keep it stationary and still when we're adding the gusset. So that's the pleats stitched in place, and then we do exactly the same with the other side of the lining. So here are both panels stitched at the bottom, and I've got my headliner. Now the headliner was originally cut to this size, and if I show you, putting the panel on top, it shrunk considerably. So I laid the panel on top of the headliner and then cut it to size. And now I'm just going to base stitch the headliner in, and I'm going to do it all the way around, so that, and because the headliner is so thin, it will sort of curve into the folds nicely. So I shall do that with both pieces before we then go on to make the gusset. Okay, so I've only stitched the sides. I haven't stitched along the bottom. I want to leave that free for now, because I decided I'm going to allow this to remain loose, and I'll probably trim the headliner down a bit more. So I just want to trim the edges to match the sides so that we can see when we're stitching the gusset onto the panel that there's no extra headliner poking out that hides the sides, so we don't stitch the sides properly. Because if we're hiding the edge of the cotton, we might miss stitch the panels together and get a different width, etc. So I just want to make sure that that's going to sit happily in there like that. And this one, because if it doesn't look like it will, I will trim it more. Like this one, this needs to be a little bit I'm happy with that. So for the gusset, we need the two side pieces and the bottom piece, and we do as we did with the exterior by stitching both pieces to the bottom piece and then top stitching across. I'm going to do all that and return. So here's the gusset prepared with the top stitching on this piece. So we get our lining pieces again, and as before with the exterior, I'm going ahead in the pleat area. As before, we measure to get the centre point. I'm doing both sides. Okay, just going to fold this in half because this one looks a bit dubious as to whether that was the centre or not. So that is the centre. I thought it looked a bit off, but there you go. So what we need to do now is pin, and I pin this. I don't use the stapler because I don't need to. Because it's cotton, I can pin it all the way through. And pin all the way around. Okay, now we've pinned that, I shall take it to the machine and stitch all the way round. I'm going to start at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, expanding to 1/2 an inch all the way round. This will allow for a better fit into the bag. Okay, I'm happy with that. And we do the same for the other side now, only we need to leave a gap in the bottom for turning for approximately maybe 5 inches, more or less the bottom piece. Right, so I've stitched all the way round. I've left the gap for turning, and I've removed the foam or the headliner from the seam allowance. Then I trimmed around the curve because the fabric was being stretched and it wouldn't have looked great. Now we get the exterior and place it into the lining, and we make sure that the zip pocket is to the back of the exterior, and we have to squish it in there to start with because obviously the top's narrower. And the most important parts to line up are the seams. And the same at the other end. And then we just clip all the way around the top and then stitch at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Right, so I sewed the bag up and then I cut the foam out of the seam allowance and then turn the bag right side out. And before I go any further, I'm going to add the connectors. So if you haven't added your connectors yet, now's the time to do it. And these are very easy to install. I just push them through and then pop the washer in. And I'm doing a lot of this by feel. And then push them down. That's nicely done. And again on the other side. It depends on the washer you have as to what slots it goes onto, and that's the case of trying to find the right slot. That's got it. And because we've got the foam, oh, we haven't got the foam on there actually. Right, thinking about it, I've not got the foam on the side. Like I have got the headliner on the front and back. So I'm going to pop some foam with some glue on each side, and I have to leave that to dry before I continue. So I shall come back when I've done that part. Okay, the connectors are added on, and now it's time to close the opening in the lining. So I get my ironing pad, and I always like to press the seam so we get a nice neat seam to close on. It's a little bit I'm not awkward, but it's just a little fiddly, that's the word, fiddly, because of the pleats. So that's probably why Sammy recommends to do a side gap, but I don't really get on with side gaps. I prefer to do a bottom one if I can. So it's just a case of manipulating the fabric to do what I want it to do. I'm sorry if you can't see this very well. It's very hard to do and trying to get in the sight for you. Okay, so I've pressed the seam like so, and now to add the double-sided tape. And if you hear any background noise, it's because my husband's tidying up in the kitchen next door to me. So, just so you know what the noise is. Bless him, he's tiptoeing around trying to be as quiet as possible. And I always say to them, this is our home, I'm not professional, I'm not being paid to do this. So, I'm just a hobbyist sharing my hobby. So if he makes a noise, it's not the end of the world. But he does his best to be quiet for me, bless him. He's very good and very understanding. A lot of husbands wouldn't be. There. That was fun. And now I just need to stitch it closed. Right, goodness me, she was a little bit fiddly to sew, but I've managed it. So hopefully you'll manage it as well. And then we push the lining eventually down into the bag. I will say I wouldn't do another one in cotton. The Paulette, which is like, you could call her a sister bag, very similar in design along the bottom. I did it with a tapestry fabric, and that was wonderful. So the tapestry fabric was fine, otherwise leather, vinyl, cork, but not cotton really. I think it's a bit too soft. Having said that, because I put headliner on the lining, beautiful, it's worked perfectly, so that solved the situation. So I'm really glad about that. All we've got left to do now is top stitch around the top of the bag, which I shall do shortly, and then add the male part of the goodness me, thumb lock. I couldn't think what it was called. Oh. Okay, so depends on what lock you've got as to where you add it and so on, but obviously it's got to be central. Mine just adds with 2 screws. However, I don't just screw it on, because if you just screw it on, this could pull off quite easily. I actually do puncture holes for the screws to go into, so that gives a good key to them. So I just want to check that it's going to sit comfortably. Yes. So I'm going to be very careful about how I measure for the holes. And make sure it's equal. So it's 3/4 of an inch that side. Okay, I'm going to mark the dots and then measure the dots more accurately. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 7/8 of an inch on one side and 7/8 of an inch, so they are very, very accurate. And I'm going to use my draper punch pliers to pierce the hole. And make sure I don't go through the top stitching. In fact, I'm going to use my twist punch because it's more accurate. When you use the twist pliers, they have this way of going in at an angle for some reason, whereas a twist punch, it's directly down, because I don't want to come out at an angle through the through the thread at the back. So doing this gives me a more accurate punch, so I don't go through the thread. Good, perfect. And then we just need to get the screws, and they're quite long screws, so that's another reason for puncturing a hole rather than just screwing them and expecting the screws to do all the work and screw through everything. went in nicely. So did that. So that's fixed on nice and firm. The screws have gone into the holes and that's nicely fixed on. So all I've got to do is top stitch around the top, and I've got a video on YouTube on how to top stitch perfectly. So do take a look. It's involving pins. And that's what I will do. So I shall top stitch the bag next and then come back and show you the result before we do the strap. So I do love this bag, and I'm so relieved that doing the headline on the lining has resolved the problem. So I've top stitched all the way round. I'm happy with my top stitching, and now put that aside to do the strap. If you don't have fabric long enough to do the strap in one go, cut 2 lengths of material to the desired length that we need. So I'm not going to give the length away. Sorry, I'm yawning. But say if we needed 60 inches, then cut enough to make up to 65 inches to allow for the excess. The reason being is when you join them together, you put them right sides together like this. So you must do a 1/4 of an inch on the top one, goes 1/4 of an inch over at the top, and the bottom one goes 1/4 of an inch over underneath, just like this. Then you stitch from that corner to that corner. Then when you open up, it will be like that. If you stitched like this, when you open up, it's going to be like that. It won't be even. So you do need to do that 1/4 of an inch over. And then when you open it up, press the seams open, top stitch either side, trim the excess, and away you go. Then cut your strap to the length desired. So if you do the extra 5 inches, you can trim it up and get the right length. However, this is the right length for the strap, perfect length. And what we need to do is measure down the centre along the centre. And then we get our double-sided tape. Now, I will just say that you have a choice. If you don't have strap ends to give the bag a nice look, fold your strap over by 1/4 of an inch so that you don't have rough strap ends. It's like open strap ends. So that will give them a closed edge. I do, however, so I'm not folding mine in. And I'm going to put the tape all the way along. Now, if I was making a handle rather than a extendable strap, or just a short strap, I would actually use a line of Peltex. Because this vinyl is quite thin. There's no padding on the vinyl. Some vinyls you get have felt on the back. This doesn't. And it wouldn't be strong enough on its own. So I would have to add it to give it some body. I'm just looking to see if I have a bag here. I do. I made the Luciana the other week by Shamballa Bags. Beautiful bag. This is the same type of vinyl. And you can see it's quite sturdy because I put Peltex in it. If you want to see how to make it, take a look at my video, the Luciana video, and see how I did the strap. That's another Shamballa Bags pattern. I will be doing all of the Shamballa Bags tutorials eventually. I'm just playing catch up, and I do make tutorials for a couple of other designers, so when they bring ones out, I do them as well. Plus I do embroidery and so on, so I'm trying to do them as quickly as I can, but I do have other things. I have a granddaughter due in a few weeks, and I'm busy making a cot quilt for her, so it's all busy. Okay, so I've added the double-sided tape to one side, and we peel the backing off. I only go so far, otherwise we get into a sticky mess. And we fold in, but we don't go all the way to the line. Stay back from the line a little. The reason being is if you go to the line, when you come to fold it again, the vinyl's going to press up against each other, and it's not going to want to do it, and you'll end up with an uneven edge where the folded edges are. So just go towards the line, but don't go on it. Okay, and get my roller. There's two reasons for using this. One, it presses the tape down even better, so you get a good adhesion. I'm not sure what the word is. You get a good stick. And then you get a nice thinner edge, so it looks nice. So we do the same on this side. Peel the backing off. And bring the tape in, and not quite to the line. So it's probably 1/8 of an inch gap. Okay, then roll it again. And then more double-sided tape. I never go right to the edge with the double-sided tape, because you can end up with it peeking through, and then you get a little bit of a sticky edge, which isn't very nice. So I go near it but not up to it. And then pull this off. And then when you fold, you see how it's just meeting each other, and that's how it should do. You shouldn't get resistance, and then you get a nice even edge, and that's what you need. So it's very important to leave that gap. I know I keep mentioning it, but I can't stress the importance enough. And just make sure that these two edges meet evenly. There's nothing worse than a strap that's got one edge seeing through. You can see the sides on the other side, if you know what I mean. So they need to be matched evenly. Lovely. Okay. And this is to make a 3/4 inch strap. If you want a wider strap, then by all means do. And now we just need to stitch up and down the sides. Okay, so I've made the strap. And now what we need to do is, the first thing is to put the strap into the slider. Like so. And then it's up to you how you add the you can sew if you wish to. I like to add a couple of rivets. So what I do is, bearing in mind that I'm adding an end strap or strap end, I measure 3/4 inch from the bottom edge for the first hole. I always add 2 rivets, and the next one 1/2 inch up from that. And then I punch the holes. That's it. And then I fold over. Sorry, I need to measure first of all. 4 inches. So I just leave a slight mark. I fold over to that line and then go through those holes I've punched to mark for where I need to punch the holes for the back. Punch a bit more. That's it. And then I'll get my rivets. And I'm using my 9mm by 9mm rivets for this because it's thick. I never use any bigger rivets, so I know some people use 10mm. I just don't, I've never needed that in all the things I've ever done. So, okay, so put the first one on and stamp down, and the second one and stamp down. Okay. And we'll put the strap end on shortly. Now what we need to do is put the first clasp on. I'm forgetting every name today. I need to make sure it's the right way. So this is the strap with the folded end down, or the short end down, and then the clasp needs to go up from that. So let me show you, so that it's like this. Okay, so it's very important that's the right way. And then we put the strap back through. Oops. Make sure that it's correct. And then back through again. And then do exactly the same for adding the other clasp by measuring 4 inches for where you need to fold to. And then on the other side, 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom. That's not central. And then 1/4 of an inch up. Then we put the clasp on, fold over, mark the holes, lovely. That's still wet enough to rub away. And then again, more rivets. Like so. Green machine. That's it. And now it's just a case of adding the strap ends. So as with the thumb lock, I'm just going to mark for where the holes need to be. And it really is quite important to do this because otherwise they just don't go in. They just squash the fabric down and there's a risk that they could pull off quite easily. So okay, so I'm going to swap for the smaller punch, the smaller die. I have all different sizes, so I like to use the smallest one I've got. I'm not completely sure the size, I think it's 1.5 mil. Make sure the strap's out of the way because you don't want to. Now, I'm not fussed if I don't go all the way through. I just want to get enough out, but if I go all the way through, then that's not an issue either. But I want to get a fairly good hole for the, so I haven't gone all the way through, but I don't need to. Just as long as we've got somewhere for the screws to sit in. There we go. And now we add the screws. Now, if you look in here, there's no sign of the leather being, or the vinyl being pushed and squashed. They have gone right in, and that's got a really good key, a really good fix on. So that's what you're looking for. Okay, that's the strap made, and that's the bag completed, and we just add the clasps on. And voila, the bag's made. Love it. I absolutely love this. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and if you do use my tutorial to make your bag, please share the link to this tutorial. Don't just tag my name, because that does not take them to the link. It takes them to my Facebook personal page. So please do give the link, the YouTube link, which is underneath the video. It's got share. Click the share button, copy link, and then you can paste it. Very easy to do. So please, please, please do that. Please mention my tutorial. Give me the credit for helping you, so that it can help others. If they don't know about it, how can they be helped? So please sort of pay it forward and give the link to my tutorial. So many people aren't, and it kind of disheartens me a little bit. So I would be very grateful. Anyway, enjoy making your bag. Love to see them in my group, which is Bag Making Addicts. Links to the Shamballa groups and website and my groups are below in the video description, along with any other links that I remember to add. Happy stitching, everyone.